I am gonna present rather quickly, since I only have 7 minutes to go with this presentation, and then certainly I'm sure there will be a lot of questions, and any questions thereafter, which certainly can take up after the quick presentation. There's a lot of information here, so I'll go quickly over this. So this is where we're at today, as of February 12th, relative to the biggest spike we had on April 30th, back last spring. So we're on the uprise, and that's no secret to everyone, obviously. Mortality, however, is, even though we're on the uprise, mortality is in check. Every life is priceless, but relative to where we were back in the spring, we're much, much better. In part because we have learned how to deal with this disease perhaps more effectively. This is from the CDC. The risk remains the same relative to the comparison group age 18 to 29. I want you to take a look at those who are 65 and above, and looking at the risk of mortality and the risk of hospitalization. I have a patient in Mubarak right now who's 85 plus years. Her risk of mortality is 630 times higher relative to a comparison group of 18 to 29. So this has not changed through the epidemic. In terms of the new treatment, in 2021, we have learned to conceptualize the disease into two phases, the virus phase and the inflammatory phase. Most people remain in the mild to moderate phase, and they don't need hospitalization. It is this group that we worry about most with respect to mortality. And we have geared our treatment with respect to what phase is the patient in, whether in the virus replication or in the inflammatory phase. We know about remdesivir, we know about dexamethasone in terms of treatment. New treatment that are on the horizon has not still been approved by major societies, include the monoclonal antibody, the convalescent plasma, and more recently over the weekend, the recovery trial showed that the anti-inflammatory tocilizumab being effective. This is the FDA authorizing given EUA authorization to the monoclonal antibody last week. This is the FDA given authorization to high titer convalescent plasma early in the month. And this is the recovery trial that led the NIH in England to approve tocilizumab, and led the NHS in England to approve tocilizumab, and led the National Institute of Health in the United States to begin to change the guideline with respect to tocilizumab. So there are more medications on the horizon, at least. What about the hadith al-sa'a, the new variants and the vaccine? There are three variants that we're dealing with, the world is dealing with. The B.1.1.7, which was in England, discovered in September 2020. The B.1.351, this was in South Africa, discovered in October of 2020. And more recently, the P.1 that was discovered in Brazil in December of 2020. So why do we worry about these? I mean, there are multiple mutations on these viruses. The UK virus has 17 mutations, but we worry about the 8 mutations that sit on the spike protein. And more specifically, there is one mutation in particular, the 501, that we really worry about most. Likewise, in the South African, we worry about 3 mutations that sits on the spike protein, and the Brazilian is the same thing. So let me just talk briefly physiology here. This is the virus, okay? These are the spike protein. When you're immunized and you have antibody, the antibody, when they see the virus, will come and bind to the spike protein to prevent the virus from binding to the human cell. Well, what happened is, if you alter this receptor binding domain that sits on the spike protein, then the antibody will not recognize the mutant federation, and this will allow the virus to bind. And that's the danger that we're dealing with these days with the mutation. And these are the mutation, the UK, South Africa, and Brazil, a number of them as well. And this is a hypothetical in terms of, because we know these mutations are highly transmissible in terms of the transmission, they're highly transmissible. So hypothetically, if you're having a high transmissibility, this will follow that you're going to have a high mortality relative to the wild type or the original virus. And this is a hypothetical. More importantly, we worry, I apologize, this is a busy slide, because to date, I'm not going to talk about the Chinese and the Russian vaccine, but to date, we have Pfizer, Moderna, and AstraZeneca. To date, the efficacy of these vaccine, 95%, 94%, and AstraZeneca, if you take the vaccine and you separate the first and the second vaccine by 12 weeks, the efficacy reaches 80%. If you don't separate them by 12 weeks, the efficacy, depending on whether you take a standard dose followed by a standard dose or a low dose followed by a standard dose, is anywhere between 62 to 90%. The problem is when you look at this side, the efficacy considerably decreases with both the UK strain as well as the South African strain. What's on the horizon? We have Johnson & Johnson. It's a one-dose adenovirus base that is expected to be approved later this month, later at the end of this month. And this really interesting subunit protein vaccine by Novavax that is still in phase 3 trial, but has efficacy against the South African strain. So is the Johnson & Johnson. The bottom line is this: the virus is not going away. Otherwise, pharmaceutical companies with millions and millions and millions of dollars will not be investing in the next generation vaccines that are on the horizon and expected to be out in 2021. To date, there are 66 clinical vaccines in trial, 176 in preclinical trial, which speaks to the fact that this is not going to go away. Otherwise, like I said, no one would invest in this. How are we doing billet weight? Billet weight, we started vaccination December 27th, December 28th, up until January 26th. I don't have the data in February. We have our rate of change is plus 1,300% in terms of our vaccination. And you may look at this and say, great, this is great. Well done, Ministry of Health. And you know what? They've done a great job. The issue is, let's compare ourselves to our peers in the Gulf. And unfortunately, we're not so hot compared to our peers. Partly, Bahrain had a jump start, as well as the United Arab Emirates had a jump start using the Chinese vaccine, and partly other logistics as well. What about transmission? What's new with transmission and prevention? We have learned that 50% of transmission comes from asymptomatic individuals in this recent article that was published in JAMA. And the bottom line is we really need to change our attitude in terms of public health and transmissibility, since most of the transmission, or 50% of the transmission, is coming from silent carrier, if you will. What about masks? Mandating masks in this study in a university setting, 86% wore, 90% wore them correctly. Compared to what we see, unfortunately, in our society, poor way, not an appropriate way of wearing mask, تحت الركبة, الخشم مبين, and so forth. What about the study that challenged that masks are not effective, that came from Denmark? I would challenge that study by this recent JAMA study that showed that countries, states that mandated masks have showed a decrease in the transmissibility of the virus. To refute the study that came from Denmark. And the point is, the overall community benefit for wearing masks derives from their combined ability to limit both exhalation and inhalation of infectious viruses, similar to the principle of herd immunity for vaccination. The greater the extent to which the intervention, meaning mask wearing, is adopted by our community, Belitwait, the larger the benefit to each individual member. So this is not about me or you. This is about the community at large. Finally, let me end with this, and this is the newest thing on the block, is one mask good or should we wear two masks? And the evidence suggests now that public health experts are more and more recommending that we wear two masks, particularly in areas that have high transmissibility, بالجمعية, بالمسجد, بالمستشفى, in your work environment, if you share your office with several colleagues. And in fact, this experiment was done double masked, single mask, single mask. And the efficacy of the double mask was 95% relative to a single mask. So much so, I have changed my practice that I wear double mask every time I go الجمعية ولا أروح المسجد. That's all I have to say, and I'll leave it for the group. Thank you.